Hi, everybody. This is Glenn, and it's May the 14th, 2026. And I wanted to do a recording for you folks. It's been a couple weeks since I've done a recording. And of course, all of you who follow me to any extent realize that what I'm doing is sharing my journey. I'm sharing my experiences with the out of body practices, sharing my experiences with investigations and studies in consciousness. This is actually something that I've been doing for a long time. Uh, I wanted to talk about something tonight that I think is something that happens to a lot of people, and it's happened to me. And in fact, you might say I'm going through this right now. And that's something called resistance. William Buhlman talked about this. Bob Peterson talked about it. I don't know for sure if Darius J. Wright talked about it or not. I haven't followed him all that closely, so I can't speak for him. Carl Jung talked about it too, because he had some experiences with out of body experiences himself back years ago when he was one of the top psychologists in the country. I got to thinking about this whole thing of resistance and getting bogged down in the practices, and I was wanted to share what's happening to me, and perhaps the same thing has happened to some of you, and I'm probably pretty sure that it has. And that's share what happened to me, what's occurred to me. I started back in doing these OBE practices 3 years ago. I used to study back in the 70s and 80s. I went from out of body travel to meditation. Studied meditation at the Himalayan Institute up in Honesdale, Pennsylvania, under a teacher by the name. There were several teachers, but the main person was Swami Rama. I studied under Paramahansa Yogananda for a while. I studied his teachings, Kriya Yoga. So I've gotten into a lot of different investigations of consciousness. And then lo and behold, here I am back to doing the out of body practices, which is to me, from everything I've gathered over the decades that I've been doing this, is that this is the ultimate spiritual experience. This is what they write about in scriptures. This is it. And that's the out of body state. It's going beyond your ego, going beyond the ego identification with the body, and realizing that we are all spiritual beings. We're all powerful, eternal spiritual beings. And that's where it's at. But you know what? We have to experience that. To just read about it, it's nice. And you can say, yeah, I can buy into that. I believe that. No, you need to experience it. First time, the very first time I experienced it, it was a spontaneous out of body experience that I had back in the 1990s. It happened to me. Now, I had some other more subtle experiences with out of body experiences back earlier than that, but the mother lode of all was in the 1990s, 1996, I think it was, that I experienced that, and it was incredible. I experienced the infinite ocean of love and mercy. I used to read about that back in the 70s. The ocean of love and mercy. That sounds nice. I experienced that. This overpowering feeling of love that just permeated everything. And I can remember having that experience, and what was going through my mind when I was experiencing all that. I was feeling sad for all the beings, all the souls who were not experiencing what I was experiencing at that moment. I felt sad for them. It was that incredible. William used to talk about the celestial experience of having that experience of being in the invisible universe. I experienced that, and it's incredible. The thing that comes the closest to capturing that was the movie Contact with Jodie Foster when she was when she took that voyage in that ball. They dropped the ball down from this contraption that they had built from that they got instructions from alien intelligence from other world beings, and they put this thing together, and she traveled through time and space in this device, and she looked out upon the universe, and she was like in tears and just in awe, and she said these famous words: they should have sent a poet, because she couldn't capture the experience as a poet might do it. And that's how I felt when I had that experience. And that prompted me to get back into to pursuing this spiritual work, because that's what it is. And we get sidetracked. And that's what I want to talk about today, just briefly. I'm sharing my experience. I'm sharing my path. I'm not, I keep going back to this, but I'm not the general right now. I'm not the major general. I'm not, at best, maybe I'm a corporal if you look at military rank. And I can hear people going, "Oh, you shouldn't talk that way." I'm just trying to show you that I'm moving along. Maybe I'm a sergeant in the ranks of the travelers, but I'm sharing my journey. I'm allowing people to see what I'm going through in this journey. And what I'd like to point out is something called resistance, because it's what I'm experiencing right now. When I started 3 years ago, I began taking the William Buhlman. I was reading his books. I was involved with the William Buhlman group on Facebook, which is a wonderful group. And I was so excited. I was so excited. I was sharing all my experiences, and I was talking about the initial experiences that I was having. I felt the vibrations and I felt movement, and I had an out of body experience. It was a subtle thing. It wasn't dramatic like the one I had about a month or two ago, but I began to have experiences, and I was very excited about it. But then something happened. I think what happens when we do this work, we become much more sensitive. This has been my experience, much more sensitive to positive and negative, to positive energy and negative energy. We become more sensitive to that. And something happened where I'm not going to say what it was because I don't want to embarrass anybody. And it, I, it didn't anger me. It just kind of slowed me down a little bit. And I guess it was my ego was bruised a little with this whole thing. It was a setback for me. And then there were kind of other things that began to happen, because for 6 months, I was having all kinds of success. But then the subconscious blocks began to show up. And Bob Peterson talked about this. Carl Jung talked about the gatekeeper. And I think Bob Peterson used that phrase too, the gatekeeper. And what I found happening is all these blocks began to show up. Physical things like interruptions and being overtaxed with work that I was doing, being sidetracked, my focus was being taken away from this work. And energy imbalances, like feeling tired, feeling lethargic, getting kind of bummed out, maybe a little anxiety about losing control and beginning to doubt yourself. And is this really working? Is this all my imagination? intrusive thoughts, sleep deprivation. I began to not get the sleep that I needed to get. My schedule became erratic, but loss of motivation, intrusive thoughts, and and as I studied, as I began to just take a look at this, I realized that back in the 70s, when I was studying what was called soul travel back then, the teacher, Paul Twitchell was his name. He was a teacher. And he talked about the negative energy. They had a name for it. It was called KAL, Cal Naranjan, or the Cal energy, which was the negative energy. And I'm not sure if I would believe that's a personification of a negative energy, but that's the term they used. And what they said, and what I'm learning about the teachings now, is as we become successful, as we begin to have breakthroughs like I was having, what I'm doing is I'm letting go more of the ego identification with the physical body, because I'm beginning to realize and experience it. You can read about it, you can hear talks about it, you can say, yeah, that's neat, I can buy into that. But when you begin to experience it, that's when the changes begin to happen. And what I think is the counter to all that is that the ego kind of fights back, because the ego is fighting for its own survival. And what's the ego? That's who you think you are behind who you are. Ram Dass used to talk about that. Richard Alpert, who was a psychologist at Harvard University, who got into consciousness studies through psychedelics initially, him and Timothy Leary. But he talked about the loss of ego, losing the ego identity, and your ego fights back, and the subconscious mind fights back too. Because look at how long I've been conditioned. I'm 77 years old. I started elementary school in 1954. All right. I've seen a lot of changes happen, and I've seen identification of being a male, being having all these identities placed on me. I was a football player, I was a baseball player, I was a student, I was a college student, then a master's program, I became a counselor, became a science teacher. All these things are identifications of who and what I think I am. And as I begin to do these practices with out of body exploration, the ego begins to disappear. It's like, I'm melting. And it fights back. And all these things show up to distract me from doing the practices. And so what what I need to do is just continue doing it. I could get all worked up and upset, angry about it, and really I'm going to do this or else. Instead of just saying, I'm going to continue doing this. I'm committed. And I guess you're calmly committed. You don't have to get upset about it. You just continue on. You're either all in or you're not. That's it. You're either all in on this or you're not. And I feel myself working through this. I've recognized what has happened to me, and it's made a difference because I continue to move forward, and that's the direction I'm heading. Is I'm going to keep moving forward. So I thought I'd share that with you folks, that I know I babbled on here for 18 minutes and 47 seconds. So I thank you so much. If you have any comments, please put a comment in there. Glenn, I think you're really off base here, or Glenn, I can really identify with that. That'd be great. Give me some feedback. Good, bad, or indifferent. Okay? I would appreciate it. If you like the video, like it, Hit the like button. That's what they all say. Hit the like button because it does help. Okay, I'm at the 20-minute mark. I think that's enough. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you again real soon. Okay, bye-bye.